News contributor Kaylee McGee-White.
Right, and the problem is this isn't just a pattern that's fitting within the special election category. It's playing out across the country. You think about the election back in Nashville in which a socialist candidate almost came very close to winning in the deep red state of Tennessee. There's Seattle, there's now Los Angeles, and of course New York City with Mamdani. Voters aren't necessarily embracing this form of leftism. The problem is that the Democratic base is. And because of recent coalition changes, the Democratic base is largely made up now of affluent, educated, white people who embrace the excesses of leftism in all of its most radical forms.
More evidence that all those protesters clashing with law enforcement are being paid to cause trouble. Fox News contributor Azra Nomani says foreign adversaries are funding anti-American protests to push socialism in America.
What the report by the Network Contagion Research Institute showed is that Democratic Socialists of America went on trips to China, Venezuela, Cuba, and then they parroted the messages of those adversaries. And one of them is this idea that America is a fascist state and that socialism is the answer. And they are very clear in their messaging. And other organizations like the Party for Socialism and Liberation have mirrored this language that America is a terror state.
Republican Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky visiting the Department of Justice yesterday to review unredacted documents related to the Epstein files. This comes after lawmakers spearheaded a bipartisan effort to pass the Epstein Files Transparency Act last year. Congressman Massie speaking about the files.
Some of these files have been taken down, like the DOJ produced them, and for some reason they took them down. But those documents not only haven't been put back up on the site with the appropriate redactions, they were not available to us to search. I mean, what we're after is the men who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked women to.
A conservative columnist is urging Republican lawmakers to pull out all the stops to get the SAVE Act passed in order to make it hard for Democrats to commit vote fraud. Chad Groening has more.
Robert Nye is a columnist for the Washington Times. His latest column is entitled, GOP Should Strike While the Voter ID Iron is Hot. In it, he says the Democrats have circled the wagons in order to oppose the Save America Act, which is pending in the House.
It's probably the most important bill they could address this year because it would require proof of citizenship for voting and photo voter IDs for all elections. And that's what we desperately need in this country. And the proof of that is that the Democrats are fiercely fighting any laws that require voter ID, and that's to facilitate vote fraud.
But Knight says 83% of the American people support voter ID, so Republicans must be ruthless in enacting it.
Because if they don't, and the way things are going, Democrats rigging elections, and if you don't believe it, look at the gerrymandered new Virginia map, which is absurd, then our country isn't going to have a two-party system, and we're going to end up in a one-party situation like California or Illinois, which is disastrous.
I'm Chad Groening.
More news online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty P.
Over the last 10 years, young people have been deconstructing their faith, or more accurately, de-Christianizing. The First Great Awakening was a supernatural move of God that happened in the American colonies just before the American Revolution. How we need another Great Awakening today. Please help spread the sparks of revival by supporting AFA with a gift, and we'll send you a free copy of the DVD, Desperate for More, The First Great Awakening. Go to afa.net/revival today.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, February 10th, and there is a group of GOP congressmen who are making headlines for something that I think is incredible. incredibly important. So obviously the New York Times disagrees with me. So we know who's on the right side of this, right? But according to CBN News, House Republicans are creating the Sharia-Free America Caucus. We will not surrender our freedoms. And so several House Republicans are uniting against dangerous Islamic ideology spreading nationwide. Texas Representative Keith Self shared with CBN News why he helped to create the Sharia-Free America Caucus. He said that North Texas has had about 20 mosques in the last 2 years. The congressman draws a direct connection between a growing Muslim population in his home state to a gradual infiltration of Islamic control. And meanwhile, the New York Times, or the failing New York Times, as I believe they're accurately called, their headline says, without a border invasion, the Texas GOP turns to an old enemy, Islam. They claim that this is just rhetoric as a way to energize Republican voters after several elections when the border was the animating force. So let's talk to one of the founding members of the Sharia-Free America Caucus, Congressman Brandon Gill from the great state of Texas. So, Congressman, I think this is a great thing, and we've seen in other countries the infiltration of Islam that has taken over their country. And obviously, as a Western nation built on the Judeo-Christian worldview, we're not going to let that happen in America. So why is the New York Times saying that, this is just a distraction and doesn't really matter?
Well, thanks for having me on. They're saying that because they know that the American people are with us. And I think the vast majority of Americans, whether you're Republican or Democrat, do not want to see America Islamized. They don't want to see their communities and their hometowns fundamentally transformed. And that's what's happening in certain parts of North Texas. And that's why we've been pushing this caucus. The American people want to see their communities preserved. They love this country the way it is. And one of the biggest concerns that I hear from constituents is Islam. It is the Islamization of North Texas. And you mentioned Keith Self talking about the number of mosques that have popped up in just the last 2 years. I mean, we have Epic City in Plano, which is just outside of my district, where you have entire Islamic communities that are being formed right here in Texas. I mean, this is a real concern for people. This is not just politics. This is a real concern that I hear every single day, and it's transforming certain areas. I hear from constituents who have lived on rural ranch land for generations, and they tell me that there is a mosque that's being constructed near their land where they can hear calls to prayer. I mean, these are real concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even here in my home state of Florida, there is a concern about the spread of Islamization and Sharia law, and I think that's really the focus is the spread of Islamic Sharia law because so many people, I think, Congressman, confuse the freedom of worship and the free exercise of religion in this country with a legal system, a religious legal system that is fundamentally incompatible with the U.S. Constitution and American law.
And that's what we hear a lot. I mean, you have parallel legal institutions that are popping up in Texas that are Sharia courts that claim to have jurisdiction over certain parts of the Islamic community. That's a real constitutional problem for the country. But I think that at core, this is an immigration issue that the American people are concerned with. You mentioned Sharia law and its incompatibility with the West. There is a reality that Islam is a political ideology, which is what people are concerned with. They're concerned with political Islam. Islam is a political ideology, has a very different conception of freedom of speech than we do in the United States, very different conception of freedom of religion, separation of church and state or mosque and state. I mean, these are core constitutional principles that undergird our entire Western civilization. And we just don't align with political Islam in these matters and in many others. And that's what people are concerned with. They're concerned with preserving our constitutional framework, and they recognize that there are certain cultures and ideologies that are incompatible with it, and political Islam is certainly one of them.
Yeah, and this just makes sense fundamentally to anyone who cares about the American way of life, preserving the U.S. Constitution, ensuring that there are no parallel legal systems and separate courts and frameworks that govern certain religions. I mean, certainly there is a different jurisdiction between civil government and our law versus, for example, I'm a member of my home church here in Florida, and we have a church disciplinary process, but that is not separate and distinct in terms of civil law from the civil government and the laws that govern our county, our state, and our nation. And so it seems like the left is trying purposefully to confuse these issues and just say that this is sort of a distraction because we have no other issues going on. And, really, Islam isn't trying to take over America. Well, as you mentioned, Congressman, I mean, this is a political ideology, and this is something we've seen already in other countries coming in to infiltrate intentionally. So what is the caucus actually doing in terms of legislation to, I mean, obviously this is against the U.S. Constitution, but to ensure that there are black letter protections?
Yeah, and first of all, you're exactly right. I think the American people see what's going on in Europe right now, where you've had a mass migration of Islam into Europe, and you've got parts of Paris and parts of London that no longer look like Paris or London. These are areas that you have areas that are essentially no-go zones for Parisians and Londoners because you have Islamic communities that have become almost like self-governing enclaves that do not work with outside civil authorities. And it's becoming unsafe for Parisianers and Londoners, and it's transforming these societies. And it's creating enormous social problems there. And we just don't want that here. We recognize that this is at core, it's an immigration issue. You can think about it this way, is that we didn't have problems with radical Islam in the United States 100 years ago. That is an issue that was imported into our country via a what I believe to be a suicidal immigration system, and that's one of the things that I think that we should be fixing. Now, you brought up the Sharia-Free America Caucus. Right now, what we're doing is making sure that our fellow congressmen are aware that this is an issue, that they're aware that here's what's going on in North Texas, here's what's going on, as you mentioned, in parts of Florida and other areas. So that everybody knows that this is something that we've got to deal with. We've got several pieces of legislation that various members have been pushing. One of them would simply ban Sharia law in the United States. I think that's about as basic and common sense as it gets. I think we've got some immigration solutions as well. But the first step is to make sure people know that this is an issue.
Absolutely. And so according to CBN, at least as of the date of this article, the caucus membership has grown to 26 Republican lawmakers, including you, from 17 states. And that includes Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, who has said that Sharia has no place in America. We will not surrender our freedoms. I totally agree with that. And so what kind of pushback, if any, are you seeing from the GOP? I mean, I think that the GOP members as a whole, everybody should be joining this caucus. I mean, this should not be, this is a no-brainer. This would be like a pro-America caucus.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Thankfully, I have not experienced any pushback from within our own party. I think that Republicans, conservatives want to preserve America. They want to preserve our founding principles and recognize that political Islam is incompatible with those principles, and you cannot have both in the same country. You got to pick one. So I have not experienced much pushback at all from this. We certainly do from the other side of the aisle, though. And it's exactly what you would expect. It's that Republicans are racist. That's what they're saying, that Republicans are discriminatory, that Republicans are picking somebody to demonize, as you alluded to in that New York Times article. But honestly, Jenna, this is something that we hear any time we take a stand on any issue. We're called racist, sexist, Islamophobic. It's kind of meaningless at this point.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny how the left has really nothing else to say. I mean, these are kind of their go-to pushbacks that don't actually have teeth, and they're completely ignoring the actual issue, which is the fundamental incompatibility of parallel legal systems in the United States. And so with this legislation, from Congress, there's also pushes in various states, including your home state of Texas, and voters will see Proposition 10, which calls for the prohibition of Sharia law in the state. How important is it to have legislation prohibiting Sharia law both on the federal level but also the state level?
Yeah, it's crucial here. It's absolutely crucial. This is something that I hear about whenever in North Texas all the time from constituents, is that they want to make sure that we're preserving our constitutional freedoms. So I think that we need legislation on the federal level, we need it on the state level, and we need local politicians as well to wake up and recognize as they're dealing with the zoning laws and other local issues that this is something that the American people care about, and they care about in these local communities as well. So I'm absolutely on board with anti-Sharia legislation on every level.
Yeah, and I hope that more states follow suit and we'll get this in place. I mean, again, it just seems like a no-brainer. But you mentioned as well Congressman Brandon Gill, my special guest this morning. You can follow him at Rep. Brandon Gill. I'd encourage you to do that. He always has great information there about what's going on in Congress. But you mentioned that this also is fundamentally an immigration problem. How, if at all, is Congress kind of using those two issues in tandem to ensure that we don't have this pervasive anti-American, anti-Western civilization ideology that infiltrates the U.S. even more than it already has?
Yeah, I mean, I think, whenever I think about immigration, there are two core immigration principles that the United States has had historically and that we've sort of moved away from in the past few decades. One of them is that if somebody immigrates into the United States, you can't be a public burden. In other words, you can't come in here and get on welfare. I think that's something that most people agree with. But the second one is one of cultural compatibility. It's that whenever we allow somebody to immigrate into the country, one, we should determine who comes into our country. It's not nobody in any other country has a right to move into the United States. That's something that we get to choose as a sovereign country, a sovereign society. And one of the bases that we should use is that your belief system, your culture, is compatible with our own. I think that there's we got to recognize a basic truth that not all cultures are equal. They're not all equally good. Not all belief systems are equally good. And they're not all equally compatible with our own governing framework. So I think that, whenever you talk about immigration, that's how we should be determining who comes into the country and who we don't allow to come into the country. I've got legislation that would, for instance, ban immigration from Somalia, which I introduced last week, both on the basis of the public burden doctrine and I think cultural compatibility. There are other pieces of legislation which I've co-sponsored or supported that my colleagues have introduced that I think use if not explicitly, a similar framework. And that's what we need to get back to in immigration policy. And at core, it's just recognizing that we're a sovereign people and we get to determine who comes into our country. And we should do it on the basis of who benefits us and not anything else.
Yeah, I could not agree more, Congressman Brandon Gill. And last question for you before we have to head to a break. I don't know if you've seen this thread by Jill Savage, who's kind of just an independent person on social media, talking about Corey Mills, who's a representative, of course, from Florida, my home state. And she alleges that the Sharia Free America Caucus has a fox in the henhouse. She says that she's spoken with 8 different people who Corey Mills himself told that he converted to Islam and has a marriage certificate that says that one of the unindicted co-conspirators of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing actually was the officiant of his wedding. I mean, this thread kind of goes on to talk about, some of those ties. Are you concerned about Mills in particular or about the overall allegation that maybe there are some who would join this caucus who are attempting to undermine its premise?
I have not seen that thread. I'm unaware of those specific allegations. So it's difficult to comment on. What I know is that in the Sharia Free Caucus, we're going to continue our agenda of very clearly and with clarity calling out political Islam, both as an immigration issue and as a cultural issue within the United States, and that mission is going to continue.
Great. Well, I hope that everyone who joins this is equally on that same agenda, and that this succeeds. And I really commend you and Representative Keith Self and Chip Roy and, some really great members of Congress who are pushing this to the fore in spite of what the failing New York Times says. So thank you so much for drawing attention to this issue, but pushing legislation as well, because it is a significant issue in the United States. So Congressman Brandon Gill, thanks so much for your time again. You can follow him at Rep. Brandon Gill, and we will be right back with more.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you're just not happy with what you've got, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and it's proven for more than 30 years. It is proven. And we know this from member surveys. People love it, which is why it's grown to hundreds of thousands of members across the country. One big factor, besides the peace of mind that comes from being a MediShare member, the savings is tremendous. It is not atypical for a family of four switching to MediShare to save more than $8,000 a year. It is a difference maker, and you can get 24/7 telehealth. You get access to more than 1 million providers and hospitals. There are flexible options, too, for your budget. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You could join MediShare anytime. So call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. Here's the number: 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
Reading through Scripture, it's easy to overlook the importance of Daniel 1:21. God allowed Daniel to live nearly 90 years, spanning the kingdoms of Babylon and the Medes and Persians. Because of his faithfulness, Daniel influenced powerful rulers and was a light in royal courts, reaching kings and officials alike. Daniel's long life reminds us that when we faithfully follow God, He opens doors we could never imagine. God works in ways far beyond our understanding, orchestrating opportunities for His glory. Daniel lived through the entire 70-year captivity, showing us the faithfulness of God. Though we fail Him often, He never fails us. Like Daniel, may we commit to finishing the work God has given us to do.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. There was a time in American history when it was a source of great pride and joy to win a spot on the U.S. Olympic team. No difference if you were a black or white, Republican or Democrat. It was about giving your all for the red, white, and blue. But those days are long gone. And this year's crop of Olympic athletes have done nothing but disparage the U.S. on foreign soil. And they have no intention of stopping. Olympic skier Hunter Hess drawing President Trump's wrath, calling the 26-year-old a real loser. Their behavior is loathsome, downright boorish, a bunch of spoiled brats from privileged backgrounds who probably will spend their post-Olympic careers working in the stockroom at TJ Maxx. Team USA is not about you or your sex life or your personal politics. It's about representing the United States of America. Otherwise, turn in your uniform and go get a job at Foot Locker. I have a lot more to say about this on my website, toddsterns.com.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And another piece of legislation that is on its way through Congress and hopefully will prevail is the SAVE Act, which is simply just ensuring that we have election integrity, and voter ID is the main issue. And it seems very obvious that we should know who is voting in our elections and that they are actually qualified to vote in elections. I mean, think about all of the places that you have to use your ID and show a government form of identification in order to do certain activities, buy certain products. And yet, somehow, the ridiculous Democratic left is suggesting that it's racist. Another big thing, according to Jamie Raskin, is that it's sexist. And somehow against the 19th Amendment because women can't figure out how to get IDs if we have name changes, last names in marriage and things like that, which is really just so insulting. It's like you really think that women aren't competent to actually go out and get an ID. And, we can figure out how to get on planes to go on honeymoons, but we can't figure out how to get an ID in order to go to the ballot box. I mean, it's just absurd and it's ridiculous. And the main reason I think that the Democrats are so against voter ID is because they know that people who shouldn't be voting in elections are, and those people are voting Democrat. Now, if those people were voting Republican, Democrats would be the first ones to say, we have to have voter ID, it's unconstitutional not to, and this is a threat to democracy and all of their rhetoric. Because for them, it's not about principle, it's not about common sense, it's not actually about America, it's about preserving their own power and their preferred outcomes. So let's welcome in Congressman Marlin Stutzman from the great state of Indiana. And Congressman, you are, I believe, a co-sponsor of this bill, and thank you for your work on pushing this through.
Hey, good morning, Jenna. Great to be with you. And yeah, you know what? One of the most basic, fundamental principles that we believe in this country is the right to vote, and the opportunity to vote is something that we all hold very dear. And when we know, just intuitively that something isn't always right, it's like, okay, well, what's going on here? Why, look at the 2020 election. I mean, there was a lot of things going on that we just can't quite put our finger on. We know something is wrong. And we had this debate back in Indiana when I was in the state legislature of showing a photo ID, showing that, you are who you say you are, and that you're only going to have one ballot and one vote. And so we require photo ID in our great state in Indiana, but here we see other states across the country that want to keep it very lenient in states like California, states like Michigan, where my good friend Pastor Lorenzo Sewell pastors a church in Detroit, and he's in the middle of this fight because all of a sudden, his congregants went to go vote, and they're like, "Well, you've already voted," and they're like, "No, we haven't. We're here to vote." And they said, "No, you voted already." So somebody took their ballot, somebody took their information and voted for them, and so that means that they're cheating and voting for the people that they want to have be the winner rather than actually letting the people choose. And so this is such an important principle that people show who they are, that they are a citizen, and having a photo ID to show they are who they say they are. And this is something that, people have to show an ID to get a library card or to buy a pack of cigarettes or to buy a alcohol or whatever. I mean, you name it. There's a lot of things that we all have to do just to show an ID. And so we think that showing an ID is a very important part of the process to be sure that our elections are safe and secure.
Yeah, and it's just so common sense, and yet, the Democrats have said that it's racist, it's sexist, it's against the Constitution, it's making it, more difficult for people to vote, and that it'll prevent people from voting. And, my response to that is, well, people who shouldn't be voting in elections if they're not qualified, if it prevents them from voting, that's actually the purpose of the law, and that's okay. That's exactly what you want. And
that's right.
So a lot of their rhetoric and their pushback just doesn't even make sense. But where is this legislation currently in Congress? And, will we actually see this passed? Because I think this could be a really signature piece of legislation heading into the midterms.
Yeah, it's really coming to a head. So there's actually two bills. There's the SAVE Act, which actually requires you to prove your citizenship when you register to vote. And then there's the Save America Act, which it requires a photo ID. And so they are both moving. The SAVE Act is already through the House and is sitting over in the Senate. And so to put more pressure on the Senate to move both of these bills, we're passing the Save America Act this week out of the House, and it'll probably be, well, you know what, it's interesting, Jenna, because I don't know if this is, there's some polling that's going around on CNN, of all places, that shows both of these issues, photo ID and you have to be a citizen to vote, is very popular amongst Americans, and it's over 50% popular with the Democrats, with so-called, when they do the polling and they ask, are you Republican or Democrat, the Democrats are saying overwhelmingly that they support this position. So it's going to be interesting how the Democrats vote on this. Now we know, the party bosses know that they don't want this to pass because then it makes it harder for them to cheat at the ballot box. But, we did this in Indiana back in 2005 or 2006, and they did the same thing to us then. They called us racist. They called us prejudiced. We're making it harder to vote. People that, can't vote or that want to vote, we're giving them hurdles. So what we did, even on the days of the election, if you didn't have a photo ID, that you could go to the BMV. And so states could do this. States could actually keep their Bureau of Motor Vehicles or Department of Motor Vehicles open the day of the election. That way, if people are, don't happen to have an ID, which, most people do, but, trying to take any excuse away, saying you could even go down, grab your ID, come back, and still vote the same day, just to be sure that everyone has the right to vote. So this is really going to be in the Senate's hands, and I know we've talked about the filibuster before. We're explaining it now as the talking filibuster versus the zombie filibuster in the Senate, where the zombie filibuster, no one has to talk. They just call it in. And so we really want the Senate to go back to the talking filibuster and get rid of the zombie filibuster.
Yeah, and this seems like, as we talked about at the end of last year with the government shutdown, it seems like the Democrats are just wielding this kind of archaic rule in the Senate to try to stop the majority and clearly what the majority of Americans want in terms of the Trump mandate and important legislation like this. So I hope that it will go through the Senate and the GOP there won't just use that as kind of a, we tried and not really actually use every tool available. But one of the other pieces of this as well is the emphasis on mail-in ballots. Obviously, that was a big deal in the 2020 election, and a lot of states that use that. And so there's been some, I think, lack of clarification on whether this legislation would actually prevent mail-in ballots, if they would have rules around that. So what's actually in the legislation for that?
Yeah, there's not. We were actually just talking about this last night after our votes, and that is something we are trying to figure out how to address it. And, a lot of members, especially conservatives, believe in federalism and that the states need to manage the elections. But what we're seeing is that states like California, Illinois, Minnesota, New York, name the liberal state, and they, California is probably the worst. I was just talking to a friend, and he said that he had 4 ballots mailed to his house from the clerk's office, and he said, I could have voted on every one of them and sent them all in. So I think, we have got to address mail-in ballots. It's not in these 2 particular bills yet. If they could be amended, I know that I would support it because we have absentee ballot voting in Indiana where you have to request a ballot because you're not going to be in town on election day. Or we also have early voting where people can go into the courthouse or to the voting center, show their ID, and vote in person that way. So I think that, there's ways to do this, but the Democrat Party does not want to prohibit mail-in ballots because that is their ticket to getting around all of this and winning with large margins, because they then go chase those ballots and they find out where people are and they ask them to fill it out. They'll stand right there. They'll even fill it out for them sometimes. But we don't have that addressed in the SAVE Act or the Save America Act. We're just addressing citizenship and photo ID. But those are still very serious conversations that we're having to try to address the fraud that goes with mail-in ballots.
And I think that's a really important clarification, and I appreciate that, Congressman Stutzman, because I think there is a lot of confusion over this, and you're absolutely right to point to federalism and the Constitution that only gives Congress some limited authority, but really it's up to the state legislatures in terms of how they conduct their elections. And however, things like photo ID and some of those things aren't in conflict with the Constitution, but of course, the left is trying to confuse those issues. So this is really important, and for people who are very concerned about election integrity, very concerned about some of these basics that really needed to be addressed well before the 2020 election. I'm glad to see that it finally is being addressed here, and hopefully that will pass through the Senate, as you mentioned, both of those pieces of legislation. But before I let you go here, too, I wanted to ask you about another piece of legislation that you are championing about single-family homes belong to single families, not institutions, and that homes that are meant for families should be purchased by families. You introduced a bill prioritizing housing affordability, as President Trump has laid out in his recent statement of administration policy. So tell us more about this.
Yeah, the other part of our American dream is, first of all, we have the opportunity to vote. And then second of all, the opportunity to own our own home. That's just part of the American dream. And I remember growing up, hearing my parents talking about buying their own farm. They wanted to buy a farm and then have their own home to raise their family. That's something that I feel, we all feel, is so important. That's become harder over the past 5 years because of interest rates. The cost of housing has gone up. Inflation was driven up through the Biden administration. And so we're now, this has been something really important to President Trump, to myself, which I'm just a big believer in saving money for the future, building up equity in your home. And so I have a bill. We just actually passed a bill out of the Financial Services Committee that had passed on the floor last night, and it's called the 21st Century Housing Act. And it's really just the government finds their way into even building homes to make it more difficult through the permitting process, through environmental studies. And so you have HUD and USDA that oftentimes conflict with each other for permitting through the environmental permits that need to be done for building. And we've heard from a lot of home builders saying it's so frustrating, we can't just get an answer. And when we do get an answer, the other agency says, no, we need it to comply this way. So we're forcing these agencies in Washington. Again, it's kind of ironic going back to federalism, but here Washington has its fingers in even our local communities when it comes to building homes. And so this makes it much simpler and streamlined, and it gets the answers that the home builders are looking for so they can move ahead. Because when you're delayed a month or 2 months, that's time is money. And when people are wanting to move ahead and build, that's important. Now, the other piece that I'm so glad President Trump mentioned just recently, I was hearing this from some of my constituents, and one in particular, my sister-in-law. She just does not like the idea of institutional investors buying single-family homes. And when she mentioned it, I was like, you know what? You're exactly right. And this has become a big issue. Why are institutional investors buying single-family homes? And it really boxes families out of being able to buy a home. So President Trump has talked about it on social media and is asking for some sort of prohibition on institutional investors. We're going to get that figured out and defined how that actually works. But they can't step in front of a family that's trying to buy a home and snatch it up for an investment, asset, rather than letting the single family buy the home. They can drive the prices up, things like that. So we're going to address this week in a bill that we're going to drop. I know that Senator Moreno in the Senate is also working on a bill, and that's really just to make sure that single family housing is for families first.
And this, again, it just seems so common sense and is great in terms of the overall affordability question that, that term has been largely pushed by the Democrats, especially heading into the midterms. But I think that what the overall issue is in terms of especially the younger generation looking for the ability to actually pursue the American dream in terms of having a home, livable wages, all of those types of things. This is just one piece of that. Where do you think the rest of the pieces may be, or maybe just, one or two bigger ones in terms of addressing the whole question of affordability as, kind of the conversation has defined it?
Yeah, so this is something that I know we hear from constituents a lot, whether it's their credit card debt, high interest rates on credit card debt. I support President Trump's effort to just put a cap on interest rates on credit cards at 10% for a year. To me, it's just very simple, Jenna. We have the federal government. The federal government always causes the problem, whether it's on the open border and immigration. And now President Trump is trying to fix it, and we're deporting these criminals, the illegals, and then the Democrats say, oh, you guys are a bunch of racists, you guys are, against the American dream. And they're doing the same thing here by saying, well, we drove the prices up through inflation, through government spending, and now President Trump is trying to fix the economy and bring prices back in line to what we all can afford. But I saw this even over the past several years in some of our family businesses, where in a restaurant we had people that were coming in and usually putting it on a credit card, all of a sudden stopped, and they were putting it in, just paying their bill with cash. And so you look at the credit card debt in our country, and it is as high as it's ever been. Interest is being paid in the billions of dollars on that. I think we just need to give people a break on these high interest rates, and that's what President Trump has continually talked about, saying that the people are paying more on interest than they are on the principal. So anything we can do to give the American people a break to catch up and catch their breath after this high inflationary period under President Biden, I think is a smart thing to do, whether it's food prices, getting food prices down. We're doing that. Energy prices, gas at the pump has come down. We still have some bills coming out right now with the heavy, hard winter with utility bills. That we still need to address the energy supply in the country to be sure that all of us have affordable energy and utilities. So this is something that was created over this big government era under President Obama and President Biden, and Republicans have now been able to address it. And I think it's going to be a major part of the election conversation once we get to election season this summer.
All right. Well, really important issues, and I really appreciate your time addressing all of these, and hopefully, in the midst of the Democrats trying to confuse a lot of these issues and, put emphasis on videos on Truth Social and other, headlines that tend to dominate, it's encouraging to hear that real work is being done in Congress on election integrity, on affordability, on the Sharia-Free America Caucus. Congressman Marlin Stutzman, really appreciate your time, and you can follow him again on X, on Facebook, on Instagram, on all the social media at Rep. Stutzman. He also posts great things about what's going on in Congress. You can get a lot of information there, so I'd encourage you to follow him, and we will be right back with more.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildman and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney Empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
Hi, I'm Tim Moore, Senior Evangelist on Christ in Prophecy. Can you see the signs of the times multiplying all around? Jesus is coming back, and He doesn't want His people to be unprepared. To stay up to date about unfolding events and get a biblical perspective on the signs of the times, listen to Christ in Prophecy here on American Family Radio. Join us Sundays at 11 a.m. Central as we reveal the prophetic hope for those who believe in Jesus Christ, as well as the Bible's warning about God's coming wrath to those who don't yet know Him.
For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. A New York jury found psychologist Kenneth Einhorn and surgeon Dr. Simon Chen liable for malpractice after they supported and performed breast removal surgery on a 16-year-old girl. The girl, Fox Varian, now 22 years old, no longer identifies as transgender and is described as a detransitioner. The medical professionals admitted during the trial that they didn't know the little girl expressed confusion about her sex, and that the psychologist and surgeon never actually had a conversation about her before the surgeon removed her breasts. The jury awarded the young lady $1.6 million for pain and suffering and another $400,000 for future medical expenses.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
It all came down to the ultrasound, and I saw this little lima bean looking thing with a halo, which I thought was incredible.
A baby wasn't really in the plan for this young mom. Even after seeing a halo on her baby on ultrasound at a preborn network clinic, she was still leaning toward abortion.
And I got to hear the heartbeat, and I got chills. In that moment, I just felt God's arms come around me and hug me and tell me that it was going to be okay.
But after meeting her baby on ultrasound, she chose life.
My choice to become a mom and hear those little footsteps running down the hallway every morning is all because I had an ultrasound. It saved my life and hers.
To find out more about Preborn's life-saving work, visit preborn.com/AFR. That's preborn.com/AFR. Your love can save a life.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And so, a lot of questions heading into the midterms, and there are a lot of important issues, and whom we elect in 2026 is going to shape the battleground for the coming years, especially in the Senate. And, we've been talking about the emphasis on some of these issues in Texas specifically. And one of the questions is, will Texas elect a Democratic senator? And this has not happened in years. And so according to the Post Next article, the last time a Democrat won a Senate race in Texas, James Tallarico, who is running for Democrat senator from Texas, was not even born yet. He's 36 years old. And this, you'll recall if you listen to this program frequently, we were talking about his utterly absurd perversion of scripture in terms of suggesting that the Bible allows for abortion in the context of the angel asking Mary for consent, quote unquote. I mean, there are so many different clips where he purports to be a Christian, yet clearly is not expressing the theology of the Bible, very clearly a Democrat, and yet has gained kind of a lot of ground in Texas. So what exactly is going on? Well, let's welcome in Tony Ortiz, who is the editor and founder of Current Revolt. Could Texas, Tony, see a Democrat senator?
The good news is no. The bad news is the idea and this kind of push and narrative by the left that, hey, it's really close and we could see a Democrat senator, that does carry a lot of the down ballot, I think, in Texas. So the candidates that are down ballot of the Senate race do benefit from the narrative that a Democrat could possibly win Senate.
And that makes sense. And this is why, turnout is always incredibly important. And just simply getting out the vote, especially in red states that, could dominate regardless, is so important. But, I find it interesting that people like James Tallarico and Zoran Mamdani and, some of these other young sort of firebrand Democrats / communists in Mamdani's case are gaining so much popularity mainly through a lot of their online media appearances and their social media presence. Do you think that translates to reality and voters?
It doesn't. And as you mentioned, he's incredibly young. James Tallarico is 36 years old. If you kind of only existed online, maybe on X or social media, you would think that Tallarico either already won or was close to winning the Democrat primary. But a recent poll by Houston Hobby shows that Tallarico is trailing Jasmine Crockett 47-39. So Tallarico coming in at 39. So he's not very close at all. But he gets a lot of media attention because of his appearance on Joe Rogan podcasts and other such shows. And again, like you mentioned, he's a young guy. He's kind of energized and things like that. And so there is a leftist media narrative to get his name out there and kind of energize the Democratic base.
Yeah, and and I find that so interesting because I think there's a similar phenomenon even on the Republican side. Here in my home state of Florida with our governor's race, I've had James Fishback on, several times. Obviously, I'll have all of the candidates on. And he's in a similar position where he has like this really big online social media presence, but it's not really translating necessarily to reality. But I think that there is a lesson that we can learn from what young voters want and where they want to see the conversations go, because, podcasts, radio programs like this one, and long form discussions are important to younger voters. And it seems like maybe some of the old way of politicking is not reaching some of the younger voters. So what can we learn maybe overall from what is working and then what translates, maybe to the polls, because eventually, Gen Z is going to be the largest voting bloc. So should politicians and candidates maybe incorporate some of that into their overall strategy?
Yeah, you're 100% correct. Younger voters, they consume content much different than older voters. However, older voters, like you mentioned, they dominate the voting sphere right now. Younger voters don't really make up that huge of a number, although that is changing. And so candidates need to focus more on how to reach them where they are, right? Which is like TikTok, Instagram. Gone are the days with the young people at Facebook. Even X isn't wholly consumed by younger, more casual voters. They're on their TikTok swiping, they're on the YouTube Shorts, or they're on their Instagram. So, but again, as of right now, doesn't really that popularity doesn't translate to real life. For example, in the Attorney General race here in Texas, the very online social media popular candidate is Aaron Reitz. But that hasn't translated to real life. When you do polling, he gets around 2 to 3%. So you can kind of see how, you have to be careful as a candidate, really investing too much in kind of young social media outreach versus what's actually going to get you past the finish line.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating because it seems like a lot of the social media, though, does drive a lot of the headlines. And so we're seeing so many more headlines about, for example, James Tallarico, and he's kind of become even a national name. I mean, I've heard of him outside of just the Texas race, and I haven't heard of some of the other candidates in other states, only because of his national media appearances and then these clips that go viral that I think in some ways are just intended to stoke the fire. I mean, similarly to James Fishback, where a lot of his media strategy, it seems like he's running his campaign just from his cell phone, and a lot of these media appearances and these clips that are posted, though, do drive actual media like, Washington Post, Politico, and some of those. So there's some kind of translation into at least name ID. And so for Tallarico in particular, where do you see Texans actually viewing him? Because he casts himself as this faith-based Christian, and yet clearly what he's saying and what he's expressing as his quote-unquote faith is not actually Christianity. And so there's, I think, some very false framing there, but it's still at least having the effect of a nationwide conversation over some of these issues.
Yeah, and Tallarico, is probably at least to like the moderate or left leaning, or actually I would say the left leaning, especially independents. Tallarico is probably for them an ideal pick. They view him as not having a lot of the scandals that maybe the Republican nominees might have, and maybe something fresh, new, and young. But again, it doesn't translate. And if you're a Democrat, you want something maybe a little more of a firebrand with a little more far left views, and that's Jasmine Crockett. So Tallarico is facing that issue where Crockett's throwing swings at him out there, and she's viewed as the more experienced, more firebrand of a candidate, and to a lot of the far left Democrats, Tallarico seems boring, and in a party that runs off of DEI and promotes those sorts of policies, Tallarico is a white man, and so he's got that also working against him in his party.
Isn't that odd when your own lack of diversity works against you, according to the radical left? But overall, then in the state of Texas, I mean, so the Democrat nominee probably will be Jasmine Crockett, I'm assuming. So then when we get to the general election, she was elected to the House, but obviously the Senate is a totally different ballgame. What do you expect from the general election, assuming that Crockett is nominee, and then who are we anticipating on the Republican side currently?
Provided Jasmine Crockett is the nominee for the Democrats, the Republican will walk into the win without a problem. The Texas is still a red state that overwhelmingly votes for a Republican governor as well. So a Republican will take that very, very easily. As far as who's going to be nominated for the Republicans, that's kind of up in the air a little bit between current Senator incumbent John Cornyn and Attorney General Ken Paxton vying for his seat. Those two are still really head to head, but again, it's becoming more and more. If you were to reference this Houston hobby poll that just came out yesterday, Ken Paxton's at 38 and John Cornyn's at 31, with Wesley Hunt coming in at 17. President Donald Trump has signaled that he's considering, or at least he's signaling, an endorsement in this race, but that's yet to be seen as well.
Yeah, and that, how do you think that may affect things? Turning Point USA Action just endorsed Paxton. For what that's worth, I'm not sure, honestly, that carries, a ton of weight. But at the same time, that signals the identification of the most MAGA candidate in the race. And so it'd be interesting to see if Trump ended up endorsing against Paxton. How may that affect the race depending on where Trump's endorsement may go?
Yeah, if President Trump would endorse, for example, Ken Paxton, they would just further nail in the coffin. He would get this race. If it were to come out for John Cornyn instead, I think that would slightly confuse especially some of the online voters who are very much pro-Paxton. Attorney General Paxton has gained a huge loyal base that it kind of seemingly seems that no matter what he does, they're going to vote for him, no matter what scandals or what anything has happened. And so I think a Trump endorsement for John Cornyn would confuse voters as whether or not it would take him over the finish line. It could possibly be that way. We just had an SD9 race where, you had a Republican lose in a plus 17 Republican district, and it swung almost completely the opposite way. And so we're seeing that maybe President Trump is considering this loss in his endorsements, and maybe considering endorsing the safer candidate, which may be John Cornyn in this situation.
That it's going to be wild. So Attorney Ortiz, really appreciate it. And we're going to keep our eye on Texas as well as the other red states and, of course, the blue states. Always elections matter. You need to know who's running. You need to know of your ballot before you get there. Follow Tony Ortiz at Current Revolt. And you can always reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net.